And it appears that they were caught in what appears to be an affair.
Wife, he has children, these kids are gonna have to watch and see this. They don't look, I would be devastated if I was his wife.
They realize they're on camera, then they pull the ripcord on that moment. He just, I don't know where he went. Can you imagine getting busted at a Coldplay concert of all places?
The executive at the center of a kiss cam controversy is stepping down.
The CEO of a billion-dollar business is in damage control after his affair with a colleague was globally exposed on a Coldplay concert kiss cam. Andy Byron, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar AI company, and Kristen Cabot, his head of human resources, were seen being intimate at the concert. He's married with teenage children, and Kristen Cabot has been divorced for 3 years. She was hired just 8 months ago, and now that 15 seconds of video is having a devastating impact on both of their careers and families. A former employee has come out and is now accusing CEO Andy of being toxic in the workplace. Former employees are cracking up over the video. The CEO was caught on the big screen with the company's HR chief at the Coldplay concert. The question many are asking is how the kiss cam landed on them. Whether it had been an employee or the cameraman in that section, we don't know. Someone knew something. Someone knew who he was, who she was. Today, we will cover the statements made by the former employee who is giving us more background to who we thought Andy Byron was. And it makes the story of his downfall so much more compelling. Turns out he had some skeletons in his closet prior to this incident, and we will cover all that and more in today's video. Once the initial clip went viral, more posts started stacking up, not rumors in the abstract timelines. Former employees stitched together dates, titles, and screenshots they claimed came from inside. None of it is courtroom proof, and all of it should be read as allegation, but the pattern they described was hard to ignore. Decisions that seemed to skip the queue, warnings that landed on the wrong people, and a culture that felt different depending on who you stood next to. One thread laid it out like a ledger. It listed when Kristen Cabot allegedly joined, when her scope expanded, when certain roles were realigned, and when the performance process tightened for a few very specific teams. Next to each line, the poster added a note: who reported to whom, which policy clause applied, and what changed after. They didn't claim to have the whole story. They claimed to have the sequence. And online, sequence can feel like motive. Another post focused on retaliation, describing how speaking up supposedly turned into reorg. The language was careful, felt like, appeared to, according to my experience, but the implication was clear. If you asked why certain exceptions kept being made, you weren't invited to ask twice. A few people even alleged that they were advised to focus on their lane, which is corporate speak for stop noticing things. Then came the so-called receipts. Not a single smoking gun, but a pile of small ones. A screenshot of a policy deck with a slide about conflict of interest. A dated Slack snippet where someone asks who should recuse from a review cycle. A calendar capture showing a string of recurring one-on-ones that by themselves mean nothing. But online, context does the heavy lifting. The captions did the rest. Look at the timing. Why this team? Right after that. Again, nothing proved. But the gravity of coincidence is strong when trust is already thin. A few lines people shared contained the following remarks. We'll handle this at the exec level. Keep it tight. COI disclosures are up this quarter. Route through legal. Short, vague. The kind of corporate phrasing that can be innocent or loaded depending on what you already believe. And belief is the currency of the internet. Once a narrative takes hold, neutral words read like codes. Some insiders claimed the problem wasn't just an affair story. It was the appearance that HR could be steered. When HR looks steerable, every safeguard feels optional. That perception is deadly, even if reality is cleaner than it seems. You don't need proof to lose trust. You only need doubt that lingers long enough to change behavior. People stop raising their hands. Teams stop telling the hard truth. The culture starts whispering when it should be shouting. To be clear, these are claims. They require independent verification, and without it, they remain posts on a feed. But they spread for a reason. They offered the audience a map, right or wrong, for how a 15-second clip might connect to months of quiet decisions. And once a map exists, people follow it until they hit a wall or a door. What did leadership do with that growing pile of perception? That's where the aftershocks begin. Public moves, private meetings, and a scramble to prove the rules still rule. And that's the part we saw next. The first sign wasn't a statement, it was silence. Profiles that once sat front and center looked different or went quiet, and observers said team pages shifted in ways that felt deliberate. That's classic crisis triage. When a narrative outruns your calendar, you pull everything back to neutral and buy time to think. Inside, the checklist almost writes itself. Comms drafts holding language. Legal asks for a preservation order on emails, chats, and calendar data. IT locks down access and expands logging. HR leadership is advised to recuse from anything that even looks related. And the board, if it's following the playbook, forms a small, tight committee to oversee what happens next, so decisions don't look like they're coming from the very people under the microscope. From the outside, you don't see that scramble. You see the optics, a reported leadership change, an interim title floating into the conversation. It "We take these matters seriously" line that reads both responsible and evasive. Recruiters slow their outreach, customers ask their reps for clarity, and employees compare notes in group chats because nothing fuels speculation like a calendar suddenly full of all hands and Q&A invites. Then come the practical moves. If the situation touches conflict of interest policies, companies usually bring in an external firm to run interviews and review procedures. It's less about theater and more about credibility. If the questions point upward, the answers can't look like they were written upstairs. Meanwhile, managers get talking points. "We can't comment on personnel matters. Business continuity is our priority. Use the hotline if you have concerns." Clean, careful, and designed to keep everything inside the lanes. Reports online framed it as more than comms. Some posts said there was a resignation, others described leave or transition. None of that settles anything for people who want a single, unmistakable answer. But that's not how real-world aftershocks work. Institutions move in steps, not swings. They change titles, reassign scope, and wait for the temperature to drop before they say what they think the facts are. Morale, though, doesn't wait. Teams read the room faster than any memo. If the guardrails feel wobbly, trust drains. If the guardrails feel real, outside investigators, recusal, transparent timelines, it starts to come back. Culture is a bank account. Crises are withdrawals. Recovery is deposits over and over until the balance looks healthy again. And while the company tried to steady itself, one person off stage shifted the story without saying a word. The internet noticed, and the tone changed. That quiet move from the spouse would become the loudest headline in the days that followed. When scandals get loud, silence becomes a signal. While feeds argued over intent and optics, one quiet change cut through the noise. Observers online said Megan, Andy's spouse, tweaked her profiles, dropped a name here, went private there, and refused to perform the pain for strangers. No press note, no public tears, just a controlled retreat that read like a line in the sand. The reaction flipped instantly. Jokes slowed, memes cooled, comments shifted from gotcha to give her space. In a story crowded with executives, lawyers, and crisis managers, the only person who didn't try to spin anything became the center of gravity. Dignity plays better than damage control. Audiences recognized it and rallied. People started reading the clip backward, seeing not a splashy moment, but a ripple that hits a family first. That reframed the stakes. This wasn't just a flirtatious pause on a jumbotron. It was a collision with real lives. Kids, mortgages, calendars suddenly split in two. When viewers feel that, the culture war turns into a character test. Who takes accountability? Who hides behind statements? Who keeps their head up and moves forward without a caption? It also sharpened the public verdict. If the people in charge bent rules for themselves, the story isn't romance, it's governance. Viewers stopped asking, were they caught? And started asking, who was supposed to protect everyone else? That question doesn't point to a concert, it points to policy, to HR, to the systems that should work the same whether the camera is on or off. There's a caution here too. The internet loves a main character, but real life doesn't need one. No doxing, no pile-ons, no vigilante justice. The healthiest outcome is boring. Facts sorted, policies enforced, people treated with basic respect, and a family allowed to heal off-screen. Still, the symbolic math is hard to miss. The quietest person in the story restored more trust with a single click than any executive statement could. And that's the pivot, from personalities to processes, from gossip to guardrails. Because if a culture breaks when two titles get tangled, the next chapter has to be about the rules that keep power from steering the people who enforce them. When an HR leader is tied to the corner office, even allegedly, the question stops being who did what and becomes, can the rules stand up to power? HR is supposed to be the spine of a company, straight, predictable, able to hold weight. If that spine bends toward the most powerful person in the building, everyone else feels it in their back. Strong orgs plan for temptation, not perfection. They require conflict of interest disclosures that name relationships, not hint at them. They use recusal maps so the people involved are removed from hiring, promotion, pay, and performance cycles that touch each other's orbit. They run third-party hotlines outside the company's servers and promise no retaliation with teeth, visible consequences when someone tries to punish a report. And when leadership is implicated, they bring in an external investigator who doesn't owe the CEO anything. Guardrails aren't paperwork, they're friction. Two-person approvals on exceptions, written rationales for out-of-band raises, audit trails on job changes, regular COI refreshes so disclosures don't gather dust. Even training matters when it's specific, not the cartoon slide deck, but real scenarios that say exactly who steps out of the room and who signs what when lines blur. Transparency makes those rules feel real. Publish anonymized quarterly stats. How many COI disclosures filed? How many recusals triggered? How many hotline cases substantiated? What changed because of them? Share case studies, scrubbed for privacy, so employees employees can see the system work without guessing. Pair that with skip-level listening sessions that go to the teams most affected by power, sales comp, engineering promotions, finance approvals, because that's where quiet pressure hides. Enforcement is where cultures live or die. If consequences scale down but soften up, people learn the wrong lesson. The standard has to rise with the title. That might mean temporary leave during an inquiry, reassigned reporting lines, or losing scope when trust is compromised. None of that requires a public spectacle. It requires consistency people can recognize from the outside in. Could this whole scandal have been avoided by airtight policies alone? Maybe not, but airtight policies would have contained the blast. They would have limited who could decide what, when, and for whom, removing the gray space where favoritism thrives and retaliation hides. That's the point of guardrails. Not to make humans perfect, but to make bad choices expensive and good process automatic. Because once doubt takes root, your business problems arrive right on schedule. Recruiting stalls, customers hesitate, investors start asking longer questions. And that's where this story heads next. Recovery. What it really takes to rebuild trust when a 15-second clip turns into a full-blown culture audit, and how you measure whether any of it is working. Reputation is momentum. When it stalls, everything feels uphill. Hiring slows, deals wobble, Slack gets quieter in the channels that matter and louder in the ones that don't. Recovery isn't a press release, it's a rhythm. And the first rule is simple: make trust measurable. Day 0 to 7 is triage. Name an interim leader with no ties to the situation and give them 3 visible powers. Approve policy changes, greenlight the outside investigation, and publish a weekly status note that says what changed, not just what was under review. Freeze any decisions that could be compromised by perceived conflicts. Map recusals in writing. Move reporting lines where needed so employees know today who judges what. Day 8 to 30 is proof. Bring in an external firm to examine conflict of interest controls, retaliation claims, and HR process integrity. Turn their scope into a public internal charter so it doesn't look like a black box. Launch a conflict registry, disclosures, recusal footprints, who sits out of which decisions, and make it searchable for employees. Pair it with a no retaliation check-in. HR or a third-party ombud schedules 30, 60, and 90-day follow-ups with anyone who filed a concern to confirm they weren't sidelined. By 30 to 90 days, you're out of promises and into deposits. Publish a trust scorecard monthly. Offer accept rates, voluntary attrition, internal mobility, time to fill, engagement scores on fairness and speak-up safety, hotline volume and substantiation rates, anonymized, and outcomes from substantiated cases. Tie a slice of executive compensation to those metrics so culture has teeth, not slogans. Policy isn't enough without repair. If the investigation finds harm, lost promotions, pay gaps, misapplied performance hits, run targeted remediation. Restored levels, corrected comp, second-look promotion cycles, revised reviews pulled out of contaminated chains. Announce the categories of fixes, not the names. People don't need gossip. They need to see gravity pulling in the right direction again. Communication has to get boring, in a good way. A weekly note from the interim leader, a standing AMA where hard questions aren't deflected, a clear document called Who Recuses from What, updated in real time. Managers get a one-page playbook for how to acknowledge the situation without minimizing it, and where to route anything sensitive outside normal channels. Externally, keep it narrow and honest. Customers want continuity and credible guardrails more than drama. Investors want a dated plan, third-party oversight, and evidence that execution didn't stall. Share the framework, not the gossip. Scope of the review, governance changes, and the cadence of updates. Over-explain process, undersell timeline. Never guess. Will it work? Not if it's cosmetic. The culture test is whether the standard rises with the title. If senior people face firmer boundaries and faster consequences than junior ones, trust rebounds. If it goes the other way, soft up, hard down, you're paying a scandal tax for quarters. The scoreboard will tell on you either way. There is a path back. It's dull, documentable, and disciplined. You rebuild by making it easy to do the right thing and expensive to do anything else. And you keep doing it long after the headlines move on, because the camera that caught you once has a long memory. But there's a deeper lesson hiding under all the policies and metrics, one most people miss until it's too late. The headline everyone clicked was the stadium clip. The story everyone stayed for was the fallout. But the part that actually matters isn't either. It's this. Scandals look sudden. Systems fail slowly. What burst on a jumbotron was only visible because the guardrails that keep power honest had already been wearing down in places most people never check. Conflict disclosures, recusal habits, who signs what, who can say no. That's why the posts hit so hard. They didn't just accuse people, they accused structure. If HR can be steered, if exceptions outnumber rules, if questions get treated like disloyalty, culture doesn't break with a viral moment. It breaks with 1,000 quiet decisions that felt convenient at the time. Put differently, the camera didn't create the problem. It removed the plausible deniability. Here's the uncomfortable takeaway for everyone watching from another company. This isn't a them problem. It's a blueprint. Ask the boring questions that prevent exciting disasters. Do relationships get disclosed in writing or handled informally? Do leaders actually recuse or just promise to be objective? Are hotlines external and proven or internal and optional? Are consequences heavier the higher you climb or the other way around? You don't need a scandal to answer those. You need a standard. And for viewers rooting for people over headlines, there's a second lesson. Resist the urge to turn pain into content. No doxing, no vigilante calls, no piling on the spouse or the kids. Hold leaders to policies. Let families heal. Push for transparency where it belongs. Process, governance, outcomes, not in the private grief of people who didn't choose the spotlight. So the open questions aren't just who tipped the camera, they're tougher. Will the board publish what changed, not just what was investigated? Will recusals be mapped in public, internally, and enforced without exceptions? Will comp and promotions get a second look where they were compromised? Will anyone with power face the same rules they wrote for everyone else? Because if there's one thing the internet is good at, it's catching the moment. If there's one thing companies have to be good at, it's proving the moment doesn't define them. The clip will fade, the policies will stay, or they won't. And that's the real test this story leaves behind. Which brings everything back to the question that started it. Was this a harmless blip blown up online, or the first honest look at how a culture actually runs when no one thinks the camera is on? Drop your take in the comments. If you want the follow-up on any official findings or policy updates, hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you're curious how crisis playbooks actually work, watch the video on your screen next. We break down the exact steps companies use to rebuild when the cameras finally turn off.